All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our August CLE training and webinar. The topic this month is back to school housing advice for students. So we got about an hour of presentation and then half an hour for question and answer at the end. Looking at the report I pulled earlier today, it doesn't look like anyone submitted a question beforehand, which indicates it's probably a problem on our end. So if you submit a question, just submit it again in the Q&A because it probably got dropped somewhere. So what is Homeline? So Homeline is a legal nonprofit. You can give us a call, give us an email, and we work in 4 languages: English, Spanish, Somali, and Hmong. You can see the 4 numbers there. Or you can email us online. Go to homelinemn.org/email and email an attorney if that works easier for you. As some brief housekeeping, the session is being recorded and it will be available on our website probably by the end of the week. If you have any questions, there's 2 buttons at the bottom of your screen, chat and then Q&A. So please use the Q&A rather than the chat, just to make sure we capture all the questions. And again, if you have a pre-submitted question, it got dropped off somewhere, so please just submit that again. And finally, CLE credits are being applied for this 1.5 standard CLE credits. If you don't know what a CLE is, good on you, and don't worry about it. And with that, our agenda today, we've got 2 parts. The first part is some sort of general finding a home advice. This is the time of year when students are looking to move into housing. It's all governed under Section 504B of the statute, but there's sort of some different rules that housing near campus plays by. And then part 2 will go into sort of college-specific issues. So roommates, guests, parties and get-togethers, and repairs. And with that, Amma, the floor is yours for part 1.
All right. Next slide. All right, let's talk about the different types of housing that are available. You know, the most common is apartments, single family homes, and multifamily homes, duplexes, triplexes, and then room leases, which is what a lot of students deal with in the different universities that are in the state. Next slide, please. So what's the difference between an apartment and a room lease? In apartments, each tenant, so if you have say it's like 4 of you renting an apartment or a house, you're all in one lease, you're all joint and severally liable for the rental payments. If you are in a room lease, say it's a room lease, it's a 4-bedroom apartment, then each tenant is only responsible for the rent payment for their own room. In terms of whether one is better than the other, it's based on preference, I think. I think near the youth in the Twin Cities, the room leases are extremely common, that we get a lot of calls over those. Next slide, please. So here's a very, very visual example of what a room lease and an apartment lease is. So the room lease, you can see the square. There are all those, there are 4 rooms there, and each tenant pays $400 a month. That's just an example. Now, if you look at the right, the apartment, it's a complex, right? And so you have all these different apartments, and tenant 1 pays a certain amount, tenant 2 pays a certain amount, and it's just because they're individual apartments. Now, when you look at those individual apartments, you might have more than one person living there. The agreement that the roommates enter into in that apartment to pay rent, that's between them. All the landlord cares about is getting their $1,600 of rent a month. So if one of the roommates stops paying rent, the other roommate's responsible for the totality of the rent. Next slide, please. So now let's look at utilities. There have been changes in, well, really big changes in how utilities can be billed now in Minnesota. First thing you need to do is look at your lease and see if your utilities are included. You know, what do you have to pay versus what the landlord has to pay. And there is no requirement that the landlord pays for utilities or that the tenant pays for certain utilities, like in terms of what the law says. It's always going to be governed by the terms of the lease. This has to be disclosed in 504B.120. All non-optional fees have to be disclosed on page 1 of the lease. So if there are fees associated to the payment of utilities. Those have to be listed on the first page of the lease. Next slide, please. Now, let's look at single meter billing. The statute is 504B 216. In single meter buildings, the landlord has to be the bill payer and customer of record with the utility company. This is for natural gas, water, sewage, and it cannot be apportioned when it comes to electricity. It can only be submetered. So the landlord can't take the total electric bill and then subdivide it by the tenants. It has to be really submetered per apartment. Late fees are capped at $5. This is a really big change. And then administrative fees have to be capped at $8. And there's mandatory disclosures in subdivision 10 of 504B.216. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at single meter billing in terms of electricity, like I said, they can only use submeters. So there's no shared or single meters allowed. And then the charges calculated have to be done by multiplying the kilowatt hour reading on your meter by the rate that's charged by the utility provider. If you look at your utility bill, it'll tell you what the rate is. I think in Minnesota it's like about 23 cents per kilowatt hour. And then any bill credits or adjustments that the landlord gets, it has to be passed on to the tenants. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of natural gas, the billing is a little bit different. There can be a shared meter or individual meters, and the calculation is they can do apportionment based on the square footage of the tenant's unit. So they'll look at the amount of square footage per apartment, and then they'll subdivide it that way among all the apartments in the building. They cannot bill for natural gas use in common areas. So if they use natural gas to heat the building, the common areas cannot be tacked on to tenants separately. And any bills or credits adjustments to the bill have to be passed on to the tenants. In terms of water meter billing, water and sewage, they can use a shared meter or individual meters. If there is a shared meter, then it's apportioned based on the number of tenants per unit. So if there's 4 tenants per unit, it's going to be apportioned amongst the 4 tenants in the unit. It cannot be billed for water used in common areas. Again, this is to tackle that pesky little thing that some landlords were doing where they were trying to charge common area utilities, tack it onto the tenants as an additional fee, I guess. And then again, all bills, credits, or adjustments have to be passed on to the tenants. So here's an example of the natural gas billing. You'll look at the total bill is $500. Square footage of all the units in the building is 10,000. The cost per square foot is calculated at 5 cents per square feet. The tenant's unit has 800 square feet. You multiply and you get $40 for that unit. Now for the water, total bill is $1,000. There's 250 tenants in the building, so the cost of water per tenant is calculated at $4 per tenant. There are 3 tenants per apartment. You do a quick little multiplication, and you get $12 per apartment for water. I think this slide is actually a good thing for all of you to keep. Take a screenshot of it because it's going to be really useful when you start getting those bills from the landlord to make sure that they're billing you properly. And one more thing I do want to point out is you have a right to ask for the actual bills that the landlord is getting. So you can see to make sure that they're calculating utilities properly. Next slide, please. In terms of fees, most apartments nowadays charge administrative fees and just fees for other things. These have to be disclosed on page 1 of the lease. The statute that applies is 504B.120. And these are mandatory fees that you can't ignore, that everyone has to pay for. Now, Non-optional fee, well, I guess it would be optional fees, like if you pay for an additional parking spot, if you have a pet, those don't need to be disclosed on page 1 of the lease, but they have to be disclosed somewhere else on the lease. Because, those are not things that they're forcing you to pay, it's just extras that you might want to add when you sign your lease. Next slide, please. Now, before signing a lease, I need you to do your research. It's not even if possible. I want you to visit that building in person. I want you to ask to see both the unit you're applying for and the common areas. The reason for this is you want to make sure there's not a bait and switch. There's some landlords that will show you, they'll have a model unit, and that's great. So you get to see the space. But I want you to go see the unit that you're actually going to be getting. You want to make sure that you like the layout. You want to make sure that you like, the carpeting or the flooring, the cabinets, the bathroom, the lighting that you're getting in that unit is exactly what you want. Because once you sign on that dotted line, doesn't matter if you sell a unit or not, you are bound to by the terms of the lease. Another thing I want you to do is check court records to see if the landlord has been dealing with a lot of rent escrows for repairs. That's usually what rent escrows are for. You want to look at conciliation court cases. Those tend to be where you'll see whether they're returning security deposits or not. And you want to make sure that they're not eviction happy. If you see a landlord with tons of evictions, it's not that you can't rent from them. It's just that, you keep that in mind. Is this a place I want to live in? What if I have an issue? Well, is this going to be a landlord that's going to be willing to work with me or not? So keep those things in mind. It's not just the price, even though price is usually the most important factor, but it's just you want to make sure that the place where you're living really meets your needs and can accommodate things that might or might not happen in the future. Next slide, please. Again, before signing a lease, you want to make sure if you live in a city that requires rental licensing, you want to make sure that the landlord is licensed. So cities that require licensing, for example, are Minneapolis and St. Paul, Duluth, Rochester, Morris, and Crookston. Minneapolis and St. Paul, it's really easy to search for rental licenses online. Just Google Minneapolis rental license and they'll send you to the website. Same with St. Paul. You can just look by the address and you'll see, who's listed as the owner or the LLC that's listed as the owner and whether they have a rental license or not. The point of this is if a landlord doesn't have a rental license, you don't want to rent from that place. Landlords are not supposed to be able to collect rent when they don't have a rental license. That doesn't mean you get to spend the money nilly-willy because, if you get the keys, you're going to be living there. But so you really need to save it if you're withholding the rent to force the landlord to get a rental license. But if you have questions about that, just call us at Homeline or contact the U of M Student Legal Services because they'll be able to assist you. We'll be able to give you more information on the rental license topic. Next slide, please. One thing I hear a lot from students is that they're feeling rushed to sign a lease. Like, oh, there's so many units available, or there's this discount that's only for today. Don't feel rushed to sign the lease. Once you sign on that dotted line, you are bound by the terms of that lease. It doesn't matter if you read it or not, if you felt pressure. Once your signature is on that document, that is a binding contract. Another thing to keep in mind is if they give you verbal promises, you want that in writing. You always want everything in writing. Verbal promises are largely unenforceable if they're not included on the lease. Think a he said, she said, or she said, she said, or he said situation. You want to make sure that everything that's discussed is written down. If you have questions about your lease, you can contact us at Homeline or you can contact Student Legal Services. We all are able to review leases and give us our thoughts, explain you what the terms are. and answer any questions you might have about it. Next slide. Move-in inspection, super important. Your landlord must offer you a move-in inspection within 14 days of the lease beginning. If they don't do the move-in inspection, you're going to do one on your own. You're going to document the conditions of the unit, things that are broken, things that are scuffed, things that are like worn down. And then you're going to take photos and videos, and then you're going to take those photos and videos and back them up. Because if you don't have the evidence, it's like, no, you didn't do the inspection. This is always very important. Things to keep in a safe place are those move-in inspection sheets, the move-in inspection evidence, like the photos or video, and a copy of your lease. Next slide, please. If they give you just a checklist to, you on your own do your inspection and check the things that are wrong or not in pristine condition in the unit, keep a copy of that before you hand it into the landlord. The purpose of this is to establish a baseline of what the property looks like when you moved in, so that when you move out, you can't be charged for things, for damage that was already there. And you'll have the evidence, right? Because you'll have those pictures and the video. Next slide, please. In terms of other resources that are available for y'all, I highly recommend that you Google Minnesota Attorney General Landlord and Tenants Rights and Responsibilities Handbook so that you know what your rights and responsibilities are under the law in Minnesota. Obviously, you can contact us at Homeline. And please use the resource of the University of Minnesota Student Legal Services. They are there to help you. They are excellent. You can reach out. You're not in this world alone. I know this might be your first rental or one of your first rentals, and it's very overwhelming. But there are resources out there for you. And I want you to reach out to us so that we can help you out. Next slide. In terms of legal aid, there's Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services, Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, Justice North up in Duluth, and Legal Services of Northwest Minnesota. You can also get a lot of really good legal information in lawhelpmn.org. You can also call Volunteer Lawyers Network. Again, there's tons of resources available for you guys out there. Next slide. And this is just a map of the areas that legal aid covers. So pink is Legal Services of Northwest Minnesota. Justice North is the green. Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid is the blue, and SMERLS is the yellow. Homeline covers the whole state. So keep that in mind. And now let's pass it on to Shayna.
All right, Shayna, before we begin with your part, I was thinking we have a slide on what Homeline is, but not really anything on what student legal services. So if you could just give us like a quick 1-minute rundown of what you guys do and who you provide services for.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. I wanted to start off by saying a big thank you to Homeline for hosting this today. Really excited to see if you're joining this CLE because you're about to come back on campus, you either just signed your lease and want to know what's going on, or you're looking for your college housing. Really excited for you. So my name's Shayna. I'm one of the staff attorneys at the University of Minnesota Student Legal Service. The University of Minnesota Student Legal Service is a full-service law firm hosted within the University of Minnesota, where we only serve University of Minnesota students. So I always say, if you have a legal question, we either are the right place to go or we know the right people. So we do housing, like we're going to talk about today. We also do immigration, consumer, criminal. We also will help you write a will or do a power of attorney. So definitely, if you are a University of Minnesota student, reach out to us. And you can literally Google University of Minnesota Student Legal Services. We are the first thing that pops up. I just double checked. And we are happy to help you. I also, as we keep going, if there's questions, throw them into the Q&A, and we have some time afterwards too for questions. And I will say as well, if you're joining us from another university, one thing to also point out is that some of the other schools, whether it is Crookston Morris or Duluth, that is in the university district, may have an attorney resource for you. As I cannot speak to the other wonderful, fabulous colleges in the Twin Cities and Greater Minnesota, but happy to answer any questions anyone has on this. Could I have the next slide, please? So, I want to talk a little bit about roommate selection and kind of the beginning starting process. This is something where, for some of you, if you're joining, maybe this is the first time that you're renting a place, or it's maybe the first time you're having roommates. Something that we always want to talk to students about is how to select roommates, and the things that you need to talk about. The first, and I always put it the first one, and it's an awkward conversation, but you need to know about the other person's ability to pay rent. That goes on if you have an individual lease or a joint lease, which we'll talk about in a following slide. If you are just renting the room, but you know your best friend's renting the room next to you and they get evicted because they can't pay rent, the landlord might put in a new person, and they have the right to put a new person in there. That, maybe won't affect you. It may be something that it does bother you because you're really planning to live with your friend. So you want to make sure that you're finding a place that the people you want to live with also is within their price range. It's doubly so if you're on a joint lease for the same reasons we talked about earlier, that if the end of the month the landlord wants $1,200, he does not care if your roommate said that they were paying $6. They only care that they got $1,200, and then it becomes both of your problems. Similarly, lifestyle and study habits. It's important to know what your friend wants to do in their space of their home. Do they plan to have friends over all of the time? Do they really expect quiet hours after a certain time? They're like, I study from 7 to midnight, and you better not even have that show you're binging on too loud. You want to know that, because getting along with a roommate is not a reason not to get out of your lease. That's something that's really unfortunate. Unfortunately, we see it a couple times every year where people have different lifestyle habits, or as we talk about cleanliness habits. It's important to know. This is what I always use as the litmus test. I think it's really important to talk to somebody about. How long is too long to have dishes in the sink? Are you a rinse and in the dishwasher sort of person, or are you like, we can let it soak. We can sit with that for a minute. You want to be on the same page on that, because the number of people in my office who have really had fights about cleanliness is not something you really want to be worrying about when you should be worrying about classes. You just want to make sure you're in the same general ballpark when it comes to that. Thoughts on guests. So most places are small. How long is too long for a guest to stay? What spaces can they be in? Do they need to be just in the bedroom when they're like hanging out? Can they be in like the common areas? Are they allowed to eat food that's in the fridge, that's, generally group food? Just really having plans for guests is important. I always use this as an example that when you have a bunch of people from Minnesota in a room together, no one will know what anyone else is thinking because no one will say a direct thought. So let's have a direct conversation before we have guests over instead of people having a fight about it later. And then lastly, a need for pets or service animals. There might be your friend has always planned to bring their cat with them to school. They want to have their cat with them, or they need to because it's a service animal. If you have a cat allergy, that could be something that you need to know and think about. So you want to make sure you're on the same page when you have a roommate. Next slide, please. And then important to know, for all of those reasons, landlords are not required to allow you to break your lease due to roommate disputes. So you and your roommate not getting along, you and your roommate yelling at each other, you and your roommate having the silent treatment, it being awkward, it being uncomfortable, them taking your shoes and leaving with your shoes. None of these are reasons that you're allowed to break your lease. The limited exception for a time when you can break your lease related to a roommate dispute is that victims of violence may break a lease if they are experiencing fear of imminent violence after being subjected to domestic abuse, criminal sexual conduct, sexual extortion, or harassment. The standards for these for harassment is higher than I don't really like that person. So there are, outside of that very limited bracket, you and your roommate are kind of bound for that lease term. It's really important that you set in line for that. Um, Often, what students will do when they end up not getting along with their roommate is very costly, right? They're trying to find a subletter. Some places will let you switch rooms for, $1,000 fee or something like that. So they're spending lots of money that they did not anticipate in order to do this. I'm spending a lot of time on roommates. I think we've spent longer on these two slides than anything else. It's the most important thing you're going to decide. Much like Alma said earlier, you want to make sure that you're not feeling rushed into this. There's a lot of people that will come to our office and they'll say, I have to find 3 people to fill this house because it's a great spot near campus and I really want to live in a house, and I found 2 and I need a third. And I found the first person I could because it's a friend's cousin, and this is what's going to happen, and we're going to make a great plan. Your roommates are one of the most quality of life factors that you will have in your selection. So just make sure that you feel confident in it. I'm speaking to freshmen now. If there's a freshman who's a go-getter who's on this call, love that. It is. Often people will start looking for housing November of the year before. So say you're looking for next fall 2026 housing. They're going to look near campus in November, December. Don't recommend that. I especially don't recommend that to freshmen who have only known people on campus for 3 months. I promise you that the friends that you have 3 months from now may be the friends that you have for the rest of your life, but you will know them better 6 months from now than you do 3 months from now. So you just need to really make sure that you spend time making sure you're selecting the right people. Could I have the next slide, please? So individual versus joint leases. There are 2 options near campus, regardless of where your college is. Individuals are less common in suburban areas. So if you're going to a community college, they are less common. They tend to be hyper-focused near large college hubs, such as, Duluth, the Twin Cities area, and tend to be close to large universities. You will often see apartments or multifamily housing living, but they are on a joint lease versus an individual lease. So I just kind of want to go through the individual pieces there depending on where you're coming from today. So for an individual lease, you are only responsible for the rental amount listed on the lease. I always say, it's an individual lease when only your name is at that first line. And also if you have a cosigner or what's called a guarantor, so like your parents, a trusted adult, is guaranteeing that if my student doesn't pay, I will pay the rent. On individual leases, they are also only responsible for your rent, right? It's common in large apartment complexes near college campus, and that you're renting private access to a bedroom and shared access to living areas, such as a kitchen, a living room, sometimes a bathroom. Sometimes you're renting as part of your private space, bedroom and private bathroom. Sometimes it's bedroom and shared bathroom. These types of units tend to be more expensive per month. So it might be they have 2 bedrooms, 2 bath, each person's on an individual lease. You and your friend are on an individual lease. And you are each paying $850 per person. So that's pretty high. That's $1,700 a month for a relatively small space. That being said, it's not very risky because you're only ever counting on yourself to pay your rent. The flip side of that is a joint lease. So under a joint lease, each person is responsible for the total sum listed on the lease, regardless of how you agree to split it. You'll know it's a joint lease because everyone's name is on that top line. So it'll be Jane, John, Alex. It'll say total monthly rent, $2,000. That means the landlord does not care if he gets it from Jane, John, or Alex. He wants $2,000 per month. And if Alex is short this month, it now becomes everybody's problem. This is common in smaller apartment complexes, in single-family homes near campus, as well as if you live in a suburban or in the larger rental community area. The most common way that leases are written are called joint leases, where everyone who lives there is on the same document. It's you're renting joint access to the full space, so they don't assign bedroom A, bedroom B, bedroom C. That's decided amongst yourselves. And it's technically cheaper per person generally. So it might be $2,000, we're splitting it all up and it's less than the individual lease half a block down where it was $900 per person, right? It's the most risky legal choice because really, if things go poorly, you are stuck with the full $2,000. So you really want to make sure that if you're choosing a joint lease, that you really know your roommates and that you are comfortable and have the ability to pay any shortfalling if somebody cannot cover their portion of the lease. Could I get the next slide, please? Let's talk guests and parties. This is something where there are often rules written into your lease in a way that is not so common in the broader rental community. So as a starting point, you have the right to guests. You can't have any landlord that says no guests allowed under any circumstances. You have the right because you are renting access to a private space to allow for guests. Here's the issue though. A guest and a long-term person who couch surfs are not the same person. A couch surfer can become a tenant even if they don't pay rent. A landlord doesn't want an extra tenant who doesn't pay rent. They're only renting to you. They only agreed to rent the space to you. They're allowed to, kind of regulate how long is too long for a guest to some greater extent. Like any good law, they don't have bright letters. Any guest longer than 4 days is now considered a tenant, and therefore the landlord could regulate that. There's nothing like that under Minnesota law, but there are a variety of factors that a court would look at. You don't want to be in that situation. You don't want long-term couch surfers. You'd want to check your lease. Landlords near campus will often regulate how many days a guest may stay without prior written permission from the landlord. The most common things I see when I'm looking at leases are they will either say how many days in a row. So no guest may stay longer than 4 days consecutively, or they will say in a given period. So they'll say no guests may stay for longer than 6 days in a 1-month period. Those would be something, I would say there's a couple things to say about that. One, a lot of landlords would not know if your person stayed 6.5 days. You want to know who does know? Your roommate knows that somebody stayed 6.5 days. Don't try to short the system or, try to hide someone. Often that will cause conflict with the other people who live in your house who have rights to guests and rights to privacy. It will also, it's not a game you want to play. It's a reason you can get evicted. You want to make sure that you follow the rules and know what the rules are in your lease. Another thing to be aware of for your guests is that you are responsible for the conduct of your guests. So if you're usually a really sweet person, very quiet, very studious, and you invite over your cousin who is maybe a little more boisterous, very loud, likes to throw a football down the hallway. And then when they threw a football down the hallway, they caused the sprinkler system to break and flood the apartment complex. That is your responsibility. So any noise complaints that you subsequently get fined for, any damage to property caused by your guest, those are all your responsibilities. So you just want to make sure that you're thoughtful in who you invite. And there are friends that you go to their house and there are friends you can have at your house. And you just want to make sure you put your friends in those right categories. Next slide, please. So parties. All right. I'm going to put on my on-campus housing attorney hat right now, and then I'll take it off for a second. The first one is, as an on-campus housing attorney, I will tell you how parties are great. You want to know what the best parties are? The parties that are not at your house. So if possible, don't host parties. There's a variety of legal risks that can be held at parties. The worst place to have parties are in tiny apartment complexes with thin walls during finals. Those are not the places to host parties. The places to host parties may be in areas where you have plenty of space, where it is in a community and during times that is respectful, and when you have done enough proper work to host responsibly a party. You want to make sure, now that I've taken that off, I'm going to take off my on-campus housing hat. If you are what I plan to do is host one really fun cookie making contest at my house during the holidays, and we are going to have several drinks, several bottles of wine. I'm going to have all of my friends over. It's going to be lovely. And you plan to do so. This is what we're going to do when we talk about how to have a party and to mitigate any risks around that. First, you're going to check your lease and your community rules. Your community rules are often a separate document that are going to be attached to your lease. They might be integrated and put in your lease. So physically read that document that's maybe 10, 50 pages long. They also are sometimes mentioned in the lease saying, and any incorporated community rules, and you will find those on like a portal or they were handed to you in a packet. You want to know what your community rules say. They often will have things such as how many guests are allowed in your unit at once. They're not usually picking on you. That's actually usually a fire code issue. Like the fire marshal says there can be no more than 10 people in that tiny apartment. You need to follow that. Any quiet hours. So if there are, if your place says no noise after 10, well, then maybe your apartment isn't the right place to host that party. And any types of prohibited activities. The most common prohibited activities I see are going to be smoking, vaping, kegs, illegal drugs, firearms. Those are going to be the things that you want to know. All of these, the prohibited activities, are what's called a material lease violation in most leases near campus. A material lease violation means that that is something that a landlord may choose to try to evict you for, even if it was just one really bad showing. An eviction is not what you want to do. You do not want to be having one cookie party and now during finals you're fighting to find out if you can stay in your house or not. So make sure you know what all of these things are before you get started. Next slide, please. And then this is more of like, be a good roommate and neighbor. If you are hosting a house party, you live in a neighborhood, I'm going to use a University of Minnesota example. You even live in Marcy Holmes, you live in a mixed residential neighborhood, meaning that many of the houses near campus are rented by college-age students, but they're also occupied by community members who live there 12 months out of the year. They may have children, they may have elderly people living with them. They may work at 6 in the morning. If you're hosting a house party, check with your neighbors and minimize any impact to the neighborhood. So make sure that, you know who your neighbors are. When you see them, when you move in this fall, if you haven't moved in already, wave to them, get to know each other. That's a good way to build neighborhood community. And then if you're going to host a party, you say something like, hey, John, tonight, we're going to have some people over for the Vikings game. I just wanted to let you know in case you see a couple extra cars near my house. We're going to try to keep it inside, but thanks so much. Let me know. Feel free to knock on my door if we're being too loud. We will try for that not to happen. You want to make sure you do something like that. Tell the guests of the rules. If you're in an apartment, no talking in the hallway, no smoking within 20 feet of the building. If they have a rule around that, that's a really common one. No loud gatherings outside on the front porch. You'll say, hey, look, let's keep it inside so that way it's not noisy for our neighbors. And then if you're going to serve alcohol, provide clear labeling on alcoholic beverages. Only invite people over who are the legal age and provide snacks. Also provide an NA option. I think that a lot of people, I'm going to throw a huge kudos out to a lot of students in 2025. A lot of people offer NA options. I just think it's really important to make sure that you have a variety of options for your guests. Next slide, please. And here are, now I'm going to put the lawyer hat back on, the risks of hosting house parties. And like, look, am I saying every house party is getting busted? No, absolutely not. But we don't want your house party to get busted. So follow all of that advice that I told you about. But here's some of the risks and why you should do that. The first thing is that you could get a city fine or a fine from your landlord for rule violations. So a city fine for like the cops got called because it was loud. You violated some sort of ordinance. Someone conducted some illegal activity. Or you got a fine from your landlord. The landlord has a rule in your lease, and the lease rule says no loud noises after 10 p.m. And if you do, it's a $100 fine. Now, to be clear, your landlord can't make up secret rule violation fines. So they can't make up secret new rules. If you found a new rule that they haven't decided to make a rule yet, you can't be, in trouble for that. They have to clearly tell you what a fine is. But a lot of landlords near campus will say that. They'll say, first rule violation, $100 fine. Second rule violation, $250 fine. Third rule violation, eviction. You want to know what that is. Eviction, that's a standalone. For certain kinds of violations, for either that you do or that a guest does, can be independent grounds to be evicted from your housing. You do not want to be in that position. You do not want to be fighting an eviction. Make sure you're making good choices and make sure you're inviting other people over who also make good choices. And then there's potential civil and criminal liability. So we have a social host law in Minnesota. A social host law means that if you are serving alcohol and you served a minor, and then and that minor gets in a car accident, right? They have a DUI. The minor has some sort of injury resulting from their intoxication. You could be held civilly responsible, meaning you have to financially pay for the conduct of minors. You don't want to have minors, don't do it. Unlawful assembly and disorderly conduct have to do with, often I see those cases when people are loud, boisterous, police get called and they're disrespectful to police, things like that. You want to make sure you're avoiding those situations, large groups that are unlawful, large groups that are unlawful and loud. Small groups that are particularly violent or rambunctious, disorderly. Discipline, and then I'm going to put this as a standalone. It's just something to think about. I know this to be true at the University of Minnesota. I don't know this to be true at every college, but I have a guess, having worked in colleges for quite some time, that this is true across the board. You can be subject to disciplinary action under your college's student conduct code, both on and off campus. So you want to make sure that you're not having a party and the party results in some bad situation, and that bad situation involves you having some sort of conduct code violation. So all of those things are things that you want to think about before you host a party. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to switch gears. So now that I just said you can't have any fun during college whatsoever, and you really need to make sure you have very responsible people, let's talk about something a little bit more interesting, and something that I think is one of the most common reasons we have people come to our office at Student Legal Service, which is the right to reasonable repair. You pay a lot of money each month in rent, and you have the right to have the place in reasonable repair, that you can enjoy your home. There's this common thing, like I hear this all the time where people will say, well, my mom said that like my college dorm was the grossest, nastiest place, and it was the stickiest, and none of the stuff ever worked. And of course, that's just what college housing is like. Of course, there's rats. Of course, there's mice. Of course, you have one sink that doesn't work. That's not true. That's not how housing works. There's not, everyone else gets habitable housing, and college students get not habitable housing. No, they still have the same responsibilities as a landlord as any other types of housing. And you should know that. So we're going to talk about the right to reasonable repair. If I could have the next slide, please. So let's start with repair requests. So backing it up, when you walk in and you've done your move-in inspection, everything's great. You're looking great. You're really excited about your house. And then a month in, it's the middle of September, you notice that your sink is leaking. And you're like, shoot. What do I do? That is not a tomorrow problem. That is a today problem. You want to make sure that you report items needing repair the same time you notice them. The reason why you want to do that is not just because it's a good practice, right? Your landlord isn't in the house. You're in the house. They don't know what needs to be fixed. You know what needs to be fixed. That's true. There's also potentially, you could be responsible for any repairs if you don't tell somebody that there's a problem and the problem gets worse. For example, you're like, well, water's included in my rent, and that's not that big of a leak, and it doesn't really bother me, so I'm not going to tell the landlord. That is a really bad idea, because then if the leak gets much, much worse and it's much, much more expensive to fix it, and the landlord can somehow prove that you knew about this for months and months and months and let it go on, you could potentially be responsible for the cost of repairs. Whereas if something's just leaking, that just happens, you're not responsible for the cost of repairs. So you want to make sure you're protecting yourself and not, causing some sort of issue later on. That being said, I'm going to do a shameless plug right now. Homeline is a great resource for this. Homeline has a repair request form that I send students to all the time. They make it really simple of how to fill out a repair request. Also, if you're a University of Minnesota student and you have access to our office, contact us right away. We'll help you put in a repair request. It's definitely something that you spend a lot of money in rent. You deserve a house that everything is in reasonable repair. When you are writing that request, you're trying to explain this leaky sink. You want to be specific in your writing of the nature of the repair needed. I'm going to pick on one of my students that I had last year, and then I'll tell you about a grade A student. So I had a student who was really, really upset because they had a really a low pressure faucet in their bathroom that made it so even when they turned the faucet all the way on, they were getting like nothing. They could barely wash their hair. And they were like, I need to put in a repair request right now. And I said, great, awesome. Let me know if you need any help. They put in the repair request. They put bathroom, faucet, repair, please. Here's the problem. They lived in a house, and the house had 4 bathrooms. They did not say which faucet needs repair or why it needs repair. So when the landlord came out, they turned on all the faucets, and they clearly didn't look at it enough to notice that one of them had like barely a trickle coming out and all the rest of them worked well. You want to be specific in the nature of the repair needed, just because we assume that nobody is as invested in this repair as you. That shouldn't be true, but it is true. So just make sure you're specific. If you can take photos of the item needing repairs, that's a great idea. And you can attach it in your portal sometimes, or if you're just like sending it via email, you want to make sure that you have the pictures of it. And that's really helpful. That's my grade A student. I had this student who sent the landlord, they said that they had a problem. They said that they had mice in their unit. And the landlord said, I've had that place checked for mice several times. There's no mice. And then she sent a video of a mice running across the kitchen floor. Great, perfect. That's the sort of thing that you want to have, so that way they can understand what you're talking about. It's not necessary, it's not legally required, but it's a good best practice if you can. You also want to take any repair progress photos and the impact that it has on the use and enjoyment of your home. And we're going to talk about this in the future slides on how long a repair can happen, but something to just document is kind of the progress of repairs. Good landlords that need repair requests will have it done quickly. It'll be seamless. It'll be kind of inconvenient that this bad thing happened, but it is what it is. Some landlords, I like to say, have, they come in, they do, 45 minutes of repair and they leave all their stuff everywhere. And then 6 days later, they come in and do an hour of repair and they leave all their stuff everywhere. And now there's a hole in your wall. You want to make sure you have documentation of all the whole progress. So that way, one, for your memory, like if you're going through it and like later you're like, what happened? That was horrible. You have documentation of that. And to protect yourself from if you end up having to go to court because the repair is not done well or it's not done in the amount of time that's allowed by Minnesota law. Could I have the next slide, please? So the repair request best practices, you want to make sure there's 2 more things. That you follow up in writing when maintenance does not come on a scheduled day. This is probably the most common thing I hear when especially when you're working with like an apartment management company, which a lot of places in your campus use an apartment management company, even if they're a small landlord. Like you'll email Jill at the front office. You'll say, hey Jill, I need pest treatment. We're going to use that. I need pest treatment. She'll say, great, awesome. We're going to have a pest guy come out on Thursday. You hang out at home because you want to like talk to this pest guy. Nobody comes on Thursday. And then you're like, oh, well, maybe I misunderstood. Maybe they're coming out Friday. Maybe they're coming out Saturday. You wait around, nobody. And it's not until the next week when you follow up and you'll be like, hey, Jill, nobody's come yet. Then she'll be like, somebody was supposed to be out last Thursday. I guess I'll call again and I'll have it ready to go in 3 days. You want to follow up the very next day. You'll say, hey, Jill, pest guy, he didn't come. Please make sure to, and then they will immediately know when you can keep the progress going. And then you also want to follow up if a repair is not completed by the legal deadline. You can follow up in email. You can also call the city inspector. Make sure most cities on that slide, it kind of talked about, have a city inspector that does code things. If you are in the city of Minneapolis, for example, all you have to do is dial 311. 311 is the city inspector. It's also the police non-emergency number. And you could talk to somebody and explain what's happened. And they will send somebody out and they will issue a citation or they will issue an order to correct. And that's a great resource because the landlord has to pay for the city inspector to come out. And so that's a great motivator to get them going. You can also file a legal lawsuit, which we will talk about as well. Next slide, please. So for certain kinds of repairs that are emergencies, these are governed by MnSTAT 504B 381. Oh, I even have it on here, 381. They have to complete certain repairs within 24 hours of written notice. And we'll talk about written notice in a minute. But these are the things that they have to start, which is a serious infestation, so like rodents, cockroaches. They say a serious infestation. I don't know what serious infestation means. Does it mean more than 1 mice? I think that sounds very serious to me because if you see 1 mouse, you know there's 5. The loss of running water, loss of hot water, loss of heat, electricity, sanitary facilities, so like the ability to flush the toilet, non-working fridge, if it's included in the lease, a non-functioning air conditioner, if it's included in the lease, a non-functioning elevator, and any conditions, services, facilities that pose a serious and negative impact on health or safety or other essential services or facilities. A good example in that kind of big catch-all list would be my front door doesn't lock properly, a ground floor window doesn't close. That would be a safety risk. For this pretty small list, considering all the things that can go wrong in a house, they have to complete repairs within 24 hours of written notice. Written means email. It means physical piece of paper written. It means portal message. It's something that you have written down. They will often have in your lease that you have to call an emergency number. You should call the emergency number. That's going to be the guy that comes out. That's what you want. But that's not what legally protects you. You need to also follow up in writing. If they fail to come out within 24 hours, you have the right to go to court under what's called an emergency tenant remedy action. An emergency tenant remedy action requires you to say, hey, I contacted my landlord. I gave him 24 hours notice. This is what's going on. I have no running water, and I want you to order the landlord to fix it and to put me somewhere else till it's fixed, or I want my rent back. I want all these things. Please, 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 can I have running water? That's what an emergency repair and an emergency tenant remedies action allows for. For everything other than this very small list, if I could have the next slide, please. They have 14 days. So we're talking everything from, oh, hey, my closet door, it just fell off, to, oh, my stove doesn't work. They have 14 days from the time that you were given written notice to complete repairs. So you really want to start that clock immediately. The saddest cases I get are the ones where a student has been fighting with a landlord for 2 weeks, but they've been talking at the front desk, and all of a sudden they have been without, something pretty serious. Maybe it's a stove, maybe it's something kind of irritating, like their fan doesn't work and it's really hot. They want to make sure that you have the 14 days in writing, because that's what starts that clock. If they fail to meet that 14-day written notice, you can file what's called a rent escrow action. Here's my pep talk for a rent escrow action. You can do it. It's scary. It's not that scary. You got this. It's a great way to get those repairs moving. I am telling you, the number of repairs that they thought that initially they're like, it's going to take 2 months to complete repairs, and then we threatened to, or we filed the rent escrow action, it is suddenly done within a week. It is a miracle every time. We love the miracle of the court. But Homeline and SLS can help. Homeline gives you advice over the phone. If you qualify for our services, we do direct representation. There's other resources that were listed, like Legal Aid and Volunteer Lawyers Network, that can also help you. There's also a court packet on the Judicial Branch website that and it tells you what things you have to have on your rent escrow action. It walks you right through it. It's meant to be done without an attorney. Renters should be able to access our court system when a landlord violates Minnesota law, and we want people to be able to do that. And in college, as a new renter, as scary as this is a great time if you have a landlord who's violating Minnesota law to learn this right. Because if you choose to be a renter throughout your life, you should know what your legal options are. So these are the things that you have to have. You have to have your address, your name, your landlord's name, their address, what issues need to be done, when you gave notice to the landlord, when you did it in writing. Oh, we love that. Whether you've contacted an inspector. So did you call the city? Did you not call the city? That's not legally required. They want to know that. They want to know that, especially if they have done an inspection report and they have required a fix, and then they missed the inspector's deadline. And then the amount of rent you will deposit. I put this at the bottom. It should really be at the top. You don't get to withhold rent because they're a bad landlord. So a landlord that fails to make repairs in the amount prescribed by Minnesota law is illegal. It does not mean that you don't have to pay rent. I know that seems very, very unfair. I also feel like that's very, very unfair, but it's the way it is. Instead, what you do is you put it in a special account called an escrow account, which is why we call them rent escrow actions, that you hang on to the court. You say, Judge, I'm willing to pay rent. Here's my rent. It's in, and you can hang on to it. And then after the landlord completes repairs, you can give the landlord back whatever is deemed appropriate under the circumstances. The judge will sometimes give all of the rent back to the landlord or some of the rent back to the landlord. The best part is that you've paid rent. You don't have to worry about paying rent anymore. You gave it to the court, and the court has to decide when and if the landlord gets any of that money back. So that's the purpose of that. Next slide, please. Oh, fabulous. I guess we were pretty fast today, so we wanted to leave some time for Q&A if people have questions.
Yeah, so we've got one question in the chat right now. Give me a second to pull it, or in the Q&A, give me a second to pull it up here. All right, this is softball, so I can take this one. Are these rules are for all renters, correct? Not just students? And yes, Section 504B applies to everyone who rents in the state of Minnesota, and not just students. So we are at 2:55 right now. I think we can give people 5 minutes to get their questions in. And then if we don't have any questions, we will give people half an hour back.
At this time of year, what would you say is the most common question that you get on the hotline from students? If you just had to like think about it.
Security deposits.
Yeah.
I think it's the big one. I'm literally trying to go over like the calls I've taken recently. Yeah, that's what I've been getting a lot lately, security deposit questions.
It's fall, it's security deposit season. That's what I would say. We do security deposit season, and then we do rodent late fall when all of the
Yeah.
critters decide to come in. For anyone who decided, go ahead.
No, and oh, there's a question right there.
Go ahead and finish security deposits, and then we can hop to the.
Okay, so yeah, so I mean, it's security deposits and like for students who are in summer housing, like the ones that are trying to look for roommates, or they signed the lease for the semester, but their economic circumstances where they can't follow through, how to break those leases is also something that I've seen quite a few incidents lately. Those are tough. I mean, if anyone needs to break a lease, breaking a lease is hard. If it's because you can't afford the unit anymore, landlords usually, especially where you're renting a room in one of those big private dorms, they really won't allow you to buy yourself out of the lease. You have to find someone to take over your lease. And just so you know, like there's discounts going on right now trying to get rooms rented. So you might have locked in a higher rate for your rent. And so it's going to be really hard to get someone to take over your lease. And for that, I always say call Homeline, call Student Legal Services, because we can give you some tips on how to manage that situation. So yeah. It's so weird because at the U, was it like students can have dorms the first year, and then second and third year they have to kind of be out in the open, and then for senior year they can get back dorms?
So I'm going to be honest, our dorming system is something that I do not always keep up with, so I don't want to say what the wrong system is, but we don't guarantee dorming for freshmen either. So there are
Okay.
So many people at any class level are in the market near campus for a variety of reasons. So, and I think it is usually November, December of the year before is when people have to decide if they're going to stay in the dorm or if they're going to choose the dorm. And sometimes people aren't able to make that choice at that time, and they go pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just moving to Minnesota. I was like, wow, it's like there's not enough dorms for everyone. I went to schools on the East Coast, and there's plenty of dorms for everyone. They want students in dorms. So that was a learning experience as a housing attorney to just see how many students, one, the proliferation of private dorms, and two, how many people rent off-campus housing.
Yeah.
and what that entails.
Yeah, and it's to me, one of the concerns I have is, if you're looking for the first time to find your housing and you're not under the university umbrella, but somebody uses the word gopher or they have like a lot of university branding, that sounds like, hey, this is maybe like, sponsored by the college or college affiliate, and that's not true.
Yeah.
And so you trust somebody maybe more than you would naturally. And that's, to me, that's concerning because we want people to be, savvy consumers, good renters who know what's going on.
I mean, I think for students, especially like freshmen, I always recommend to not be in a big house. And that's just, I know it's fun to party. I know, miss those days. But you want to be settled first, and you want to like selecting roommates is tough. Um, so my 2 cents from an old lady here.
Okay.
All right. So we've got an open question here. So kind of a two-parter, a part about escrow, which Shana, if you want to handle, and then a retaliation bit, Alma, if you want to take. So the question is, how does one go about starting the escrow process? Do you need to tell the landlord first? I'm assuming this won't go over well.
I hear you. So, how you're informing your landlord is you are putting in that 14-day notice. And again, I cannot stress this form enough. I love this form. When I was a brand new attorney, I was like, how am I going to write a repair request? Because they don't give you forms when you're in law school, which I think is wrong, but it's true. And I used the whole line form. I said, hey, if I am going, landlord, I need X repaired. This is a description of the problem. This is what's going on. If you do not complete repairs within 14 days, I will seek legal action. Um, that is as much as you need to say. You don't need to say, day 14, all right, today you make sure that you have it done, or else. You don't need any secret reminders. You can if you want to, if you think it's going to be successful, right? You're like, hey, it's day 15. Guy didn't come even though he said he was coming tomorrow. You want to make sure that I just want to make sure you knew that before I filed rent escrow. You don't have to do that. You can, absolutely can. If that makes you think that that's a good choice, you think that maybe you still have a good open relationship with your landlord, that's great. But once you have all of this description that's on this slide in there, that is all you're required to give. You need to let them know they need a repair, and it's their job to complete the repair.
In terms of retaliation, I think, well, it's not, I think, the law protects you for 90 days. So, once you submit a maintenance request, or a repair request, you're protected for 90 days. I mean, this is just true in many markets, but landlords care about money. So, they want to make sure that their rent gets paid. And if that means that they have to go fix that window that won't close, they might not want to do it, but they're going to do it because they want to get their rent money. So I don't want you guys to be super concerned about retaliation. You always keep your spidey senses alert. But know that the law does protect you.
All right, we got another question in. Do student leases typically automatically terminate on the end date? Does it matter if students sign a 1-year lease but move out of town for the summer?
Oh, this is awesome. Okay, Dallas, this is one of the most common problems I have. And this is the first thing when we do, I should have said this in the beginning. Shout out if you're a college student at the University of Minnesota. We do free lease reviews before anytime you sign a lease. And this is on my checklist of things that I go through on an individual lease review. Is what day does your lease end? And is that the right day for that lease to end based on your circumstances? And do you have to give notice on if you're going to stay or if you're going to go? Most leases, not all, but I would say the vast majority, 99% of leases I review in a given year, will have what's called a notice period on them. A notice period means that you need to let us know by X date if you're staying or if you're going. That notice period cannot be longer than 6 months. So it can't be, October 2025, you need to let me know if you're still going to be here September 2026. They cannot do that, but they can give a pretty long notice period. It can be 4 or 5 months. You want to know what it is. You want to count the dates of when you need to give notice on if you're staying or if you're going. If you fail to give notice properly, you are stuck there on what's called a month-to-month lease until you've given proper notice. That is not a place anyone wants to be. Another thing that you should know is that notice is effective only if it's given on the last day before the day when the notice is due. And that's a weird way to say this. But what it means is if I need to let the landlord know by June 1st, if I'm still going to be here in September, I actually have to let them know by May 30th if I'm still going to be there if I need to go. Um, you can't do it on the first day of the month. You have to do it on the last day of the month prior to the notice month. So you want to put that in your calendar. Put a Google reminder on there. Send a carrier pigeon. Let, a trusted friend or parent know. You really want to make sure you know what that notice period is. If you know sooner and you're like, I'm locked in, I'm out of here, not a chance, you can let them know sooner. That doesn't hurt anything. It very rarely benefits you to let them know, yes, I'm going to stay sooner. So don't lock yourself in early, but make sure that you're meeting that notice period. I say that because many college campuses will have what's called a housing fair, and that housing fair is maybe late fall, early spring of your college. And they will want to know who's staying and who's leaving before they go to that college fair to try to find more people to live in their housing. Often they will say, this is the best rate that you are ever going to have. This is the best. You will lock in at the best rate today if you sign for a new lease next year in November. Please, please do it. I'll give you a $50 Amazon card. That's a very common scheme. I will tell you that the vast majority of students who sign leases this fall for next academic year for the 26-27 year will not have the best rate. They generally are the middle to high end of the rate that you will receive later. Right now is typically the best rate. So, because as Alva said, there's a lot of open rooms still. Depending on your college campus, this is not true. In Duluth, Duluth has a 93% occupancy rate. I have different advice for students in Duluth. If you are in the Twin Cities area, there is a majority of housing. You are not going to be without housing. I'm less aware in Duluth, in Crookston, and in Morris, and in Rochester what your community looks like. You're going to want to ask a trusted university person what is more common in your university area. But my understanding, speaking with students at large, is there is plenty of time for housing. And then the other piece, which is, hey, what's the date? Like, does the date matter if I'm going to stay there? You are legally obligated to pay rent for every single month in which you are on a lease term for, whether or not you habitate that place. So if you know in your heart that you are going to an internship over the summer, or that you are going to go visit family somewhere, or you're going to study abroad, or you're going to go have a great vacation, you should try to find a lease that reflects that and have a plan and if you can't find a lease that's like a 9-month lease, because some places will do it, but many won't, then you should make a plan to pay rent for every month you're there. You could try to find a subletter, someone to take over for the summer. But I will tell you, there's a lot of students that are looking for subletters, and there's not as many people that want to live near college campuses in the summer as want to leave college campuses. So make a plan to either have a shorter lease or to pay rent every month, regardless of if you live there or not.
All right, and that is all of our open questions. Give people, say, 1 more minute here in case anyone has any straggling questions. Other than that, we will give people some time back here.
Well, I guess I should mention, in college campuses, it used to be very typical that landlords, you would move in and within a month, they'd be like, are you renewing the lease for next year? They can't do that anymore. They can only ask you to renew the lease, I think it's like 6 months before the end of the lease term. So keep that in mind. If you rent a place and the landlord immediately wants you to renew the lease for the next year, you don't have to agree to that. Landlords are allowed to show the property. That's a legitimate business purpose. They just have to give you proper notice. And there's a window of time when they can come in. But for those specific questions, just feel free to call us, either Student Legal Services or Homeline, and we'll be able to give you, more information on that subject.
All right, we got one more question in. I think we're going to call it, unless we get any more. So if a non-optional fee is listed inaccurately on the first page, is it still enforceable? For example, a fee disclosed as a month-to-month fee that is actually during a term lease.
So I will say that this is something that some landlords near campus that I see are really struggling on what's a non-optional fee and what's an optional fee. And I think that the intent is good. They're trying to put things that are, otherwise hidden on page 20 on the first page of the lease that may or may not apply. So if they said on the first page of the lease that they have a month-to-month fee that's $200 a month. So if at the end of your lease term, if you don't renew but you stay occupying the unit, it's going to, instead of being $1,100 a month, it's now going to be $1,300 a month. That is a good thing to have listed on your lease, but you do want to clarify with them that they're not saying that you're on a month-to-month lease, like that they've somehow got it confused in their system. We don't sign any leases for things that we are not sure we agree to, is what I always say. Typically, I would say, no, I wouldn't worry about that. It's very normal. I see non-optional fees listed on the first page of the lease that they're like, this is not optional if this event happens. Great, awesome. Over disclosure is wonderful. But you want to make sure that you understand what's going to show up in that portal as your first month's rent. And so just make sure, follow all of the advice Alma had about having that in writing, that you know that you agree to all the terms of it and that you are aware of what that means. We trust leasing agents like we trust used car salesmen. They don't, like they may or may not be telling you the whole truth. They're not going to lie to your face, but they want to rent the space. So you just want to make sure that you have all the information you need to make a good choice.
All right, and with that, I think we're done with Q&A here. Thank you everyone who showed up. Hope you have a good rest of the day and take care.
Bye.
All right, we are off recording now.
Cool.
Thank you again to both of you. Really happy with how that turned out. So
Yeah. All right. Well, talk to you guys later.
Yeah, good to see you both.
Bye.
here.